Kumlen Ablat Gemara. Today's daf is the end of the very first Pedic of Bava Kama. We are up to daf Yud Zion and we're in the very bottom of the page. So we're talking about Chizkiah Melech being buried. So the Gemara says some interesting things about a tzaddik being buried. It says the Gemara. It says in the pasuk that they gave him all this kind of honor. They gave his honor to Chizkiah. What kind of honor did they give Chizkiah HaMelech? Melamed Shahayeshiva Yeshiva Al Kibre. They made a yeshiva right by his graveside. And the Rishonim already asked that the reason is obviously because he spread Torah everywhere, and everybody from Be'er Sheva until Don knew all the laws of Tumah V'Tara. Everyone was very acquainted with the Torah. But the question is, how can you're working a basic as you can't wear your tzitzis out because you're poking fun at the people who died because they cannot perform the mitzvahs. So what do you mean that they made the yeshiva right where he is? So Taisa here says it was a distance of 4 amas. The Radvaz says they actually made the yeshiva directly on top of his kever. And like some of the other Rishonim say, where you're doing it for the honor of the deceased, there's no poking fun. On the contrary. So the question is, how long did they have that yeshiva running there? Pligi bar Abnasim Rabban. Chadom one says Shloisha 3 days. Chadom one says Shiva 7 days. The Amla say Shloisha 30 days. What's the argument? There are different stages of Avelis. The first 3 days, Abel's not allowed to greet anybody, not allowed to say anything to anybody. The second 3 days, he can respond. So we're saying that because of degrees of Avelis, and then Shleshim, again, there's another set of Avelis. Therefore, that's the argument. For which degree of Avelis, how long was the yeshiva there for? Others say it depends also on the body as it decomposes, our stages, and the neshama leaving the kever, our stages. And that's the argument, how long the yeshiva remained over there. Third we learned. The covered Moshe is actually an argument. They made a covered. They made covered by him. Zechizkiah Melech Yehuda, the king. What did they do? She yotzu lefon of shloishim v'shisha elef chalutzikasim. 36,000 people came and displayed their avelas by cutting off their sleeve and exposing their shoulder, and that was a sign of avelas. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Amalei Mechem said, "V'haloi lifnei Achav." We just began before Achav also came. El Shenicha Sefer Torah Al Mitoshe. What happened was when we're talking about Chizkiah HaMelech that he was buried next to David, it says in the pasuk they gave him a great honor. So we have an argument what the great honor is. One opinion is that 36,000 people went and openly showed their mourning, and you sign them all 6 lines on top. The other opinion is they made a yeshiva. They made a yeshiva by his kever, and Nehemiah says that this thing of many mourners, they did that before Achav. Even though tzaddikim did not do that, but his slaves and most of the people who thought that he was great, they actually showed their avelis. And what they did was hinicha sefer Torah al mitoseh, which is consonant with the idea they had a yeshiva there. And we said before, machlek the yeshiva was directly on top of the kever, or was it right 4 amas away from the kever? You say they put a sefer Torah on his bed, even though you're not allowed to put a sefer, you're not allowed to sit on the same bench as a sefer and a sefer Torah and so on. But nevertheless, in this case over here, they did it for Chizkiah HaMelech to show that he fulfilled the entire Torah, because he was a godly b'Torah. What do you call it? Even though the Gemara said that regarding Rab Huna, and we had in Gittin Rab Huna that even Rab Asi and Rab Ami were bottled compared to Rab Huna. Rab Huna was the greatest in his generation, but it doesn't equal to Chizkiah HaMelech. So it put a sefer Torah on the bed, but Omer they said Ki amzeh mashakasu bezeh, that Chizkiah HaMelech fulfilled every single mitzvah, every precept in this Torah. But Eden the Nami said, "What's the big deal? We do the same thing today. We also do the same thing. It sounds like they take out a sefer Torah by a funeral of a tzaddik. So we say Afuki Mafkina. You're right. We take out a sefer Torah, but Anuchi loy manchinen. We don't place a sefer Torah on the bed either because, as we said, the Gemara might cotton it's pasnish to have a sefer sitting on the bench that you're on, or because loyeg l'rosh. You're poking fun at the poor person, at the deceased who cannot perform the mitzvahs anymore. Already by same, sorry, that's what some are saying regarding Chizkiah HaMelech, but regarding average tzaddik, we don't do it. Ibai said the answer is anuche nami manchinen. That even today we'll place sefer Torah. To say that he fulfilled the entire Torah, that is because it says in the pasuk, there isn't a tzaddik ba'arash yasa toiv lo yechta. Everybody has some defects or faults, and therefore maybe we shouldn't say that. Amar Rabba Chana, Amar Rabba Bava Kama Daf, and we were once walking with Rabbi Yechon and Mishra Shmaita to actually have a discussion about this very subject. When in a bathroom, and we asked him this question, and he refused to answer. At the Moshe Yadi, when he came out of the bathroom, he washed his hands. Umanach tefillin, he put on tefillin. From here, they bring a proof that even tefillin shayad, you're not allowed to take with you in the bathroom. So it's in the discussion. And we also have this Gemara in Sukkot that Mavov about you make a bracha every time you take off and put on the tefillin. He made a bracha. Now, interesting, it says umanach umavarach. So from here you learn out, one of the places you learn out that you have to put on the tefillin in your hand, but before you tie it, or as you're tying it, you make a bracha. It doesn't say here that he tied the tefillin and then he made the bracha. Or it doesn't say the tefillin was in the bag. It says umanach. He put the tefillin on his hand. It doesn't say he tied it, and he made a bracha. And then he told us. So what did he tell us? That I feel kiyam amrina. That today we can even say the fulfilled the mitzvahs. To say that he taught others, that we don't say. Says the Gemara, didn't we learn that God will limit maybe the sorry, right? We're saying limit to learn, we don't say. So Gemara says, what do you mean? But God will limit Maisa. What Gemara's question? We learned in Gemara Kedushin, if you remember that Memdi, we had a discussion. What's greater? What's greater? Talmud Torah or mitzvahs? So what's Gemara's question here? So the way Rashi learned from me, very interesting. The Gemara says there, the wording is God will halimut maybe Maisa. Learning is great because it brings you the mitzvahs. So it's very cryptic. So which one is greater? On the one hand, it sounds like God's limud, but then you say the reason why learning is great because it brings you to mitzvahs. Sounds like that the mitzvahs are greater. So Rashi clearly says over here, that mitzvahs are greater. I'll just quote Rashi, Alma Maisa Adif, because learning is only a means to an end. The end is mitzvahs. So the question is, if you're going to say that this person does mitzvahs, and you're going to withhold saying that he learned Torah. On the contrary, it's a greater achievement to do mitzvahs than Torah. Tosfos learned the Gemara that's exactly the opposite. That Godel Halimut Shavei Ma'aseh, therefore learning is greater. And what's the logic in that? So Alter Rebbe in Shulchan in Hilchos Talmud Torah says because learning is a mitzvah in its own right. Plus, it teaches, it brings you to understand all other mitzvahs. So it has that double advantage. In the Rambam, he adds a vov, Godel Limud Umevi Ledei Ma'aseh. That does two things. Anyway, so the Gemara's question according to Tosfos is that since the only way to do mitzvahs is by learning, so if we say that he fulfilled the entire Torah, obviously we're saying is that he learned Torah. We're saying it already. So what do you tell me that ki mamrina and limit la'amrina? So the Gemara, there's a difference. When do we say learning? That mitzvahs are greater than learning. Where you're learning for yourself, you're learning mitzvahs. But when you're teaching others, then learning is greater than mitzvahs. Tosfos in Kedushin there wants to say that it's a difference in the early stages of your life or later. In the early stages of your life, you need to know the mitzvahs, then you're learning for the mitzvahs is greater. But once you know the mitzvahs and you continue learning, then Torah is greater. And you're going to teach others. So interesting. Which I never understood this Gemara here. So we don't want, we of course you learn for yourself, we say, but we don't want to say that you taught others. But teaching others is the only thing that we can see. What you do personally, whether you fulfill all the mitzvahs or not, whether you learn Torah for yourself or not, we don't really know. But one thing we do know is we see a guy giving shiur, and we know that you've taught to others. And that's the only thing we don't say, which I don't understand why not. Anyway, he says in the pasuk, "Ashreichem, praiseworthy, azoidei, al kol mayim." Those who plant seeds on all the waters. Mishalchei regel hashreichem, they send the legs of a shayin. What's the pasuk talking about here? What are you praising the people who plant seeds in all the waters, and you're comparing them to a shayin chamor? What is that talking about? So the Gemara says, the word mayim we'll soon see is a metaphor for learning Torah, a mayim Torah, and also for giving charity. If you do both of them, remember we had a Gemara Abaye and Rabba who learned Torah live 40 years, but Abaye who learned Torah and did Chasadim lived 60 years, even though they were from the family of Eli that was cursed. So here we're saying if you learn Torah and you do Chasadim, you will inherit, you will have the portion of the two tribes. Remember it says, Ashreichem zoirei, plural, those who plant. Where do we find the expression of planting regarding mitzvahs? Regarding tzedakah. By tzedakah it says, tzedakah, plant for yourselves charity, and you will harvest according to your generosity. And then mayim, also we have ein mayim ela Torah. We also know that water is Torah. How do we know that water is Torah? Because the Shneimah says, "Hoi kol tzama luchul mayim." Remember, I was really thirsty. Go ahead and quench your thirst with water. And it's talking there about it's a metaphor for Torah. So if you do these two mitzvahs, Teiling and Chasadim, Zeichel and Nachlas Neshvatim, you will inherit the portions of these two tribes. Which ones? Zeichel Lekilel Yosef, you have the canopy of Yosef. It says Ben Poidas Yosef that he's a charming son. Benois Sada Alishur, all these girls were going on the wall to look at him. And that's number one. So you have Yosef's brachas and the Zeiche, and you're also Zeiche the Nachlas Yisachar to Yisachar. If it says Yisachar Chamer Goram, Yisachar is compared to a donkey. So Yosef is compared to Al Shur. There should be saying Shur, and Yisachar is compared to a donkey. So you'll have the brachas of Yisachar and Yosef. And we know by Yosef there's no Ayin Hara, and so on. Or he's damning, all your enemies will fall aside. Like Yosef it says, Behem Amim Yingach, with these horns he will destroy. It says, he will destroy these nations, Afsei Oretz, all the remnants of the world. He'll be intelligent. It says, Leitim the Das Mayasi Israel. He knows the timetable, the Chadash, and everything else. Why the Gemara doesn't say that we compared to Yosef that you have no Ayin Hara? But we learned many times in the Gemara that Yosef's specialty was that Ayin Hara didn't affect him. Unless that applies to the entire Klal Yisrael. And there Yosef is a metaphor. Here we're talking about a bracha that's specifically for Yosef. Moshe Rabbeinu gave a bracha to Yosef here, gave a bracha to Yosef here, or Yaakov gave a bracha to Yosef. We're using the two brachas. Same family. No. Hadin Aloch Arba Avis. Okay. Now starts the second page. The second page is not a new page, it's actually a continuation of the first page. So we learned that there are different kinds of damages. There's the damage of Keren, there's a damage of Regel, there's a damage of Shen, and we said that Keren means you're out to cause damage, even though you have no pleasure from it. That's Keren. And then you pay half the damage, you pay only half the damage the first 3 times. Then we have Regel. The Regel is any damage that you cause, which is common, which is, this is a normal way of behaving while you're walking, or you have things that's attached to yourself. And then you have Shen. Shen is it eats for pleasure. Again, no intention of causing damage. It does it purely lahanosan, for its pleasure. That falls under the umbrella of Shen. And Shen V'regel, you already know that your animal does these things normally. You should have been aware. You pay the full amount. But in a Shus Rabin, you're exempt. So the mission now continues, and we're going to delineate further about the regel. In the yeshiva world, Kate said the regel is a real yeshiva shapir. If we had time, we would go through some of the ksassim there, but it's beautiful. Anyway, everyone, if you have time, learn the ksassim on this Gemara here, and some of the Rishonim, Yam Shlomo. So, says the Gemara here. Keitzad haregel. What exactly is regel? We're going to go through different of this. So, Keitzad haregel. Whether you said that regel is automatically forewarned, the balabasa forewarned, the animal's going to do this. What's he going to do? L'shabe b'derech lucha. While the animal walks, it breaks things. And now he explains it. Habehema. And you might wonder why we sort of repeat ourselves. First it says general rule regel. Now he specifically hones in on a behema. Habehema, what's the behema normally do? Moedis. It's you're forewarned. Lahala kedak. The behema walks normally, and while it walks, the Shabbat it breaks things, it breaks things. But the animal, when kicking things, that's really not normal. Or stones or pebbles were flying underneath its feet, and when it shattered things as it was flying, the shavras akalim, that's called tsureidas. The animal didn't directly break anything; it's his koyach, it's his energy that broke something. That's called tsureidas, pebbles, which we learned already before twice. That's halacha l'Moshe Messina. It is regel, but you only pay half the money. Remember again, it's only in the Shus Yachid, not in the Shus Rab. But we're going to learn later about if you're walking in Shus Rabin where the pebble flies and lands in a Shus Yachid, you are chayiv. According to the Gemara says later, many Rishonim, and the Rush in the beginning, the first Pedic, maybe a little different. When we get to Gemara, we'll talk about it. Dorsa ala keli. Now starts an interesting idea. The animal is walking on a keli, right? The shavrase and broke it. Okay, so that's called a regel, right? Walking normally, broke the keli. But what happened was the shards of this keli, the pieces, the nafal al keli sheni. The pieces fell on another keli and broke that one. Vishavru. Now, the animal didn't directly break the second keli. It was his koyach, his force, that broke the second keli. So alarishan, which he trampled directly on, that's called regel mishalom nevishalom. You pay the full amount. But ala achran on the second keli, because it was a shard that went flying from the first keli, so that's his force. Force is is pebbles, and pebbles you only pay half. Ala achran mishalom chati nezik. Okay, then he said hatan goyim. It comes to chickens. Muadin lahala kedakan. They walk normally. The lishabir, and they break things as well as they're jumping around. Hoya delil kosher baragel. What happens if it's either delil, some say delil a pail, or delil means anything. Something was tied around his leg, and he was jumping around. That thing that was tied to his leg broke things. Oishay mahadis, it was jumping up and down. Umishabes a kalim and broke a bunch of kalim. Again, mishalim chatzinezik. Why? Because this pail that went flying, Mar will explain later, is like his force. Force is pebbles. Pebbles, you pay half a nezik. And again, when we say he jumped, not that when he jumped and he landed, he broke it. That's direct. That's regal. Talking about he jumped and then the thing went flying. A force. Therefore, it's regal. First, let's first understand the text of the Mishnah. It starts off Ketzah Regel and then it says behemoth. Isn't that the same thing? It's redundant. Amalei, he said, Tana Avos, Tana Tulis. First, he says a general rule. The Av, remember we had in the beginning of Beis, we went through every single one of these in the Zikin, the Av, and what's written in the Torah, and then the Tulis, which are very, very similar. So the Avos is the rebel walking, when he walks, he stomps, he breaks things. And then we're talking about Tulis. Tulis is like, you shove your body against the wall. Let's say the hair, things get tangled in the hair of the animal. That's all the Tulis. So that's in the two parts of the Mishnah. So the first part is Avos, second part is Tulis. El Meyativ, so Seifa. So Ravina asked Rava back to Rava. If so, let's learn the next part of the Mishnah. The next Mishnah is, which we haven't learned yet, the same thing about Shen. It says the Shen Wedis. It says Behemoth Wedis. My others and my tool is the what's the oven? What's the tool of the? And then it talks about. It says an example is that he ate fruits and vegetables. That's not the tool. That's the That's what it is. That's Shen. Eating grains and fruits and vegetables, and yet it still has the same breakup, the Shen, and then it says behemoth. So Rava turned around and sort of mocking Ravina, or maybe not mocking him, but he sort of said to him in jest, well, he said, look, you asked me one question, I answered you. Now it's your turn. You answer your question. Here's your question. So Moses says, the time am I, but the point, what's the answer? Amarabashi, interesting. The order could have just said, because by the first Mishnah we have that sign, that's kind of syntax. So the second Mishnah we use the same syntax. The Gemara doesn't say that. Amarabashi, Tana Shen the Chayik, Tana Shen the Behemoth. They're also necessary. When he starts off, he's talking about Shen of a Chaya, and then of a non-domesticated animal, and like a deer or something, and then Shen of a Behemoth. So I would have thought, what do you mean? Why do you need both? Isn't it obvious? No. I would have thought, V'shilach is b'iraksiv. It says you send your animal. Your animal is a domesticated animal. Behemoth, I would have thought that only you're responsible for a behemoth if it ate in someone else's fields. A chaya may be not responsible. Kamashalan, because the Torah is clearly b'irah. B'irah means an animal. Kamashalan, the chaya b'chal behemoth. Comes to teach you that no, a chaya is included in behemoth. How do we know that? According to Rashi, when it talks about treif, it says zois ha-behemoth asher teichel. These animals you can eat, and then he gives examples also of a chaya, who's a deer, for example, or a mountain or whatever. So therefore, that's we know chaya is included in behemoth. Taste learns from another pasuk that chaya is b'chal behemoth. Because Taisa says if that's the case, how come birds then? We just learned the mission that birds are also chai for Shen. We'll learn later on. If a bird eats, now according if you learn from the pasuk chai b'chal behemoth, then how in the world do you know that a bird is included? Right? Because it says Tanagelas and Wedis, we'll see later. So he said we learned from Shabbos that even though they're talking about behemoth, behemoth have to rest. We know that every single animal of yours, including your fowl, also have to rest on Shabbos. So from the boy, and we talk about fowl resting on Shabbos, we had Marchul in the whole Shaila. If you have a fowl, this climb, if you connect a bird of yours together with an animal to plow together, that's considered climb. So we see that the people somehow or another are able to use birds actually to do work for you. Says the Gemara, so shouldn't the first the Mishnah have said behemoth and then say the second thing, which is chayik? The behemoth is written clearly in the Torah. Chayik is what you learn from, you glean from behemoth. So in the Mishnah, the order should have been reversed. Says the Gemara, a famous saying we have it a number of times already. The asyalei midrasha chaviulei. That which is not clear in the Torah, he likes better. So the Mishnah therefore begins with the chaya, which was we glean from the Torah from beiroi, shil beiroi, and what says clear in the Torah we write second. Saying we said before, if you remember a few times, Rashi says that what's an av and what's a tulda when it comes to the zikin, even though the halach is exactly the same, that which is written in the Torah is an av, so and not written in the Torah tulda. You just told me that the Mishnah starts off first the av and then the tulda, but according to you, it's just written the tulda first and then the av, because that which we learn from a drasha is a favorite. So at least first right in the tuldas, which is not written in the Torah. So what are you talking about? Pasam idi v'idi avasnim. Their chay or behemoth, it's exactly the same thing. No, boss, chay is not clear in the Torah. We have to learn it out. So since it's the same status anyway, so that which we learn from Drasha we'll put first in the Mishnah. Over here, it's an av versus a tulda. You want to put tuldas before the av? Hacha shavik av tani tulda. Here you want to leave the av behind and learn tulda first. That doesn't make sense. Another answer is Aidi the solik merego, pasach merego. Another answer is since in the last Pedic, the last Pedic, the last thing was we learned regel muedas and so on and so forth. So therefore, it doesn't say behema; it just says regel. So therefore, when this Mishnah begins, it starts with regel, and then later it adds behema. Okay, talking about we learned. Behema mued l'halak kedarka. A behema is a mued when it walks normally and breaks things while it's walking. Ul Shabbat to break case, for example. Behema nizik. But remember, when you chay for shen v'regel, only in private property, only in the victim's property. In a public space, because it says v'shilach es beiro yabir b'zdei acher, only b'zdei acher. So if the hema entered the property of the victim, the hizika and caused damage. How? Begufa, with its body. So regel has to be with its body. Derech chilucha while it's walking. For example, with its feet, it's trampling on things. Or beside the thing get tangled in its hair. Derech chilucha while it's walking. Or ba'ikah saddle that's the saddle, even though it's not part of the animal, because it's attached to the animal, it's considered part of the animal. Uvishali shaleh, if he has even a bundle on top of it, but it's tied down, so it's like part of the animal. And he's walking and suddenly the bag on top of him bangs something and breaks it. We'll see more later. Or like a muzzle in the mouth. Or a bell. Anything which is closely attached to the animal is considered part of the animal, and that's regular if it's walking and breaks things. The chamoy b'masay and a donkey with its peckle. Mishal nezik shalom. You pay a nezik shalom. You pay a nezik shalom. Why do you have to mention Masoy Chamoy? We just said Bishalif Sholeh, which means the same thing. So Taisa says that the Chamoy's package is not so tightly bound to the Chamoy, because the Chamoy usually put a very big bundle, probably much bigger things than a horse, and or whatever cow, and therefore the Chiddush that's still considered part of the donkey. Okay. Sumchis says Tzereirus. He brings up Tzereirus, which means your force, and a pebble goes flying. So you didn't break it directly. The pebble broke it, but it was your force that caused it to happen. Or a chazir, shahaya goyver, the pig, shahaya noiver ashba was there, using, playing around, rolling around in the dirt. The hizik and the dirt went flying, and it caused, with damage. Is mishalom nezik shalom. Some can hold you pay nezik shalom, because we'll soon see he holds that he doesn't believe in the whole concept of traders is chatzi nezik. It's a nezik shalom. If the animal caused the damage, right now we're saying that we thought the chazah is doing it directly, the damage. He's going around the mud and then he turns around and suddenly he hits something with his body. No, of course you have to pay. Why not? Not that the pig directly or the hog directly caused damage, but something went flying, so it's his force. Mishal never shown. The Gemara says, why is Sumchas suddenly talking about pebbles? Who mentioned the Tanna Kama doesn't mention a word about it? So obviously, a couple of words missing. This is, we continue the Tanna Kama. If the animal's walking and pebbles go flying as normal when the animal walks, and it causes damage, chatzi nezik. This would be exactly the same thing. You're driving in a car and then a pebble falls out and if it goes flying from the back wheel of the car in front of you and goes right into your screen and breaks the screen. It's exactly the same thing. That will be tzreiros. And bichatzi, but not a rabim. You only chayiv if it's in a yachid. Kiyochayu chatzi nezik. Says the Gemara. So that's what the Tanna Kama says. The chazir and you add the chazir shoy noig ba'ash v'hitis v'hitim shalach nezik. Because no Tanna Kama said tzreiros. If it's your force, you only pay half a nezik. Hamzon Sumch disagrees. He said tzreiros. The chazir in those two cases shoy noig ba'ash v'hitis v'hitim shalach. I don't believe in the whole concept of tzreiros, which actually is a A big problem because the Rambam lays down a rule. There's no arguments when it comes to halacha Moshe Sinai. Halacha Sinai is something we all accept. That's how it is. And there's a few questions on that. First of all, Tainis in the beginning there when it talks about how do you know the whole idea of Nisach Hamayim? Where do you learn it from? Rabbi Yehuda learns it from Mem, Yud, Mem, this Kehem is an extra Mem, an extra Yud, an extra Mem, and the other time argue. But at least over there they agree in Nisach Hamayim. The question is how many days and so on. Or you learn from Pasuk like Moshe. Here, there's an argument. Tanakama says halacha Moshe Sinai tzroiros you pay half, and Sumcha says no such thing. And the Achreim tried to explain how this works to fit into the rule of the Rambam. Tanakama learned. Tanakama chicken shayim africhin. They're flying from place to place. V'shavru kleilim b'kanfeim, and their wings touch things, so that's directly from the body. Misham doesn't show them. That's a regel. But the ruach b'kanfeim. Let's say the wind. They were fluttering in the wings, and it created a wind. Let's say a wind tunnel, and something went, something went flying as well as that. Mishal mechatzin nezek. Why? Because that is treitus. So it says nezek shalom. So clearly again, you see they're arguing in that very discussion. Tanyich another price. Tanagon shoyim hatzin agabi yisrael. Tanagon would jump up down on top of dove, agabi peitos on top of fruits, but tin food got it all dirty on nikru, or they made holes in the food. Mishal nezek shalom, because directly from their body. But hell will offer it treitus. But if they raise dirt or pebbles, mishal mechatzin nezek, you pay only half a nezek. Again, force. Of course, have nezek. Sumcha says nezek shalom because he doesn't believe in tzreidos. Again, I guess because we wanted to bring proof that somebody actually argues on this halacha shina. Stamazai wouldn't say it. A third price, tanidich. Tana was flying from place to place. The yotza ruach kanfel created a wind. The shivra the kalim and broke kalim. Mishalom chatzin nezek. Stomach rabban. This must be according to the rabbis because according to Sumchas, there's no such thing as chatzin nezek tzreidos. He holds, you pay the full nezek. My Rabba says, Rabba, I understand Sumchis, so he holds, right now the Gemara doesn't yet say that he argues on Tzreidos. The Gemara says, maybe he holds, then what's it if your body breaks something or my force breaks something? It all traces back to me. El Rabbanan. Let's understand the Rabbanan. Why are you paying half the damage? If my force is like I did it, I should pay the full damage, like Regel. The Kula does it. Tell me, look, I didn't do it. It's only my force. I should pay nothing. The Chatin and Amil Shal don't pay nothing. So this is what we learned before. That why did the Chacham say this is regel? That if your force does it, just like regel, but it's a special law from Moshe Messinai, the Chatzin Nezek Treidos, Hilchas special law of Moshe Messinai that even though it should be considered regel, but you only pay half. And because we consider regel, if it's in a Shus Rabbin, you'll be exempt. Only you pay half. Now, the Rif adds, why are you putting Shus Rabbim? The Urchi B'Hachi, because animals walk and rocks go flying. So the Rosh asks, what does the Rif come to give us a reason for? The Torah says, that only applies when you're going to else's property. What's the Rif giving a whole new reason? So he says, there's a big naf communal halacha for this reason. What happens if the cow is walking Shus Rabbim and he is walking on a board? On the other end of the board, there's a keli or something there, and he's walking and breaks the keli, but the keli is sitting in a private place. But where was the animal walking? In the Shus Rabbim. So the question is, are you chayiv or you're not chayiv? Because so he said, because urchei b'hachi, therefore you are potter. The animal walks, doesn't look where it's walking. But if you wouldn't have done urchei hachi, I would say, one second, the damage happened in Shus Yachid. It's bir b'zdei Bir means where did the damage take place? B'zdei it did. He should be liable. So the Rosh is mechadish, according to the Rif, that if the animal is walking normally, and even though it causes the damage in the private property, you are potter. The Korban Hassan and others have a big problem with that. So how does the Rif know to come up with a svara and then make new halachas? If he wouldn't have, the Rif made it up, because nowhere does the Gemara say that reason. And if it does make a difference in halacha, no, if you're just saying giving a reason to explain the Torah, but really makes no nafka min halacha, very nice. But if it actually has an impact on halacha, the outcome, Rab Shimon used to dash in time with the Quran, and he used to make up a halachas as a result of that. But we can't do that. We don't pass Rab Shimon. Anyway, Amar says Rabba. But that's why in the next Gemara we're going to learn. But you maybe it's a kosov. Maybe it's a kosov. How do we know? Later on, the Gemara is going to talk about if the animal's walking on a rock when flying to another property in Shus Yachid, Rabba will say you're potter because Chatzin Tzreidos is potter in Shus Rabbim. The Rif admits that. So the Rosh says, why does the Rif admit it? Because that Gimel on the base, we pass in Chatzin Tzreidos, and the reason is because Urchi B'Hachi, and therefore that this Gemara will argue that Gemara. Anyway, we'll see. Amar says Rabba. This is the rule. Kol shebezav tamei, anything which a zav touches becomes a tamei. No, but he directly touches. Is bezikim shalom l'shalom. Saying an animal directly causes damage, the regal, you pay the full amount. Kol shebezav toy, but if it's indirect. For example, if a zav throws a cup, and that cup touches something else, that something else does not become tamei. So the same thing here. Bezikim shalom chatzin. That's troiris. No, if it's a force, not direct, you pay chatzin nezik. The Rava says the Gemara, the Rava Sroidus Osel Lashminan. What's Rava telling us? What's he adding with this new rule about the Zav? We know the rule. We know Sroidus means force. It's not direct from the animal. The Gemara says, "Lo, you know." Rava Agola Mesheches Bekarin Kamashmalan. He wants to teach you that if a Zav, let's say, is tummy, and the Zav is sitting on a wagon, and they're going on top of Kalim. The wagon goes over Kalim. They are tummy. Why? It's as if the zav is touching, even though it's a little bit indirect. It's as if it's touching the kelim underneath. So the same thing by nezikin. If there's, let's say, being a wagon being pulled, or let's say a cab or something else, or one of your animals, a horse, whatever, is pulling a wagon, and going and as it's going, the wagon is crushing things. Your animal is pulling a wagon. So now you might argue that this is considered force. The animal is not touching that. The animal is the wagon is attached to the animal, and the wagon was breaking the kelim. Kamashalan, that because the wagon is attached to the animal, even though it's outside the animal, it's just like by a zov, if he's inside the wagon, everything that's underneath his tummy. So too, the animal is pulling the wagon, everything that's underneath the wagon is considered as if the animal is doing directly. So you pay nezik shalom and not chatzin nezik. It's only if the rocks that underneath the wagon, let's say, go flying and they break things, that's called the chatzin nezik. Okay, Taish doesn't like the pshat at all because, or other Shayim don't like the pshat at all because they say that if the zav is inside the wagon, that is directly on top. It's different than the animals in front of the wagon drawing the wagon. It's not a good analogy. Anyway, Tanakh was a Rabbi Lung, Rabbi Behema Muedes the Shabbat Glucha breaks things as walking. Case of Behema goes to Chazanizik, Vizika damage Bekufa with his body while it's walking, the side of the hair, walking by or the saddle, or a package on it, or or a muzzle in its mouth, or a bell around its neck, the Chamoy B'Masai, or a donkey with his bundle on top. And what this price adds is the Agola Mashech is the cutter. If your animal there is pulling a wagon, B'Sham L'Sham is direct. Tell them what we learned. Tanagoylim, the Brisa is cryptic, and the Gemara will explain soon. Tanagoylim, chickens, in the chevel that were poking away at a rope. The lee, a rope that was attached to a pail, a bucket. The nifsik hachevel, the rope for then tore. The nishbradli lift the pail, the bucket fell down, and it broke. Is mishalmin nezik shalom. It's direct damage, even though he's working with a rope. It's considered direct damage, and you pay nezik shalom. We'll see more later why. So, boy, Rabbi, that's an interesting question. I'll tell you a little bit about the about tomorrow. Won't be time today, but let's just do the Gemara today. Boy, Rabbi, that's a question. Darsa al kli v'lo. Let's say the animal, the whatever it is, or the bird walked on a keli, trampled on the keli, didn't break it, but then v'niz galgo, the keli itself rolled. Not a pebble, not a keli went flying and broke something else. That's where we learned his force. This very keli then rolled the nishbar, and eventually it broke. Mao. Now, when it broke, you're not touching it anymore, so it was only your force. But when you started it directly, it's not like you took hit a rock and the rock went flying, hit something totally different. With that thing that broke eventually had nothing to do with the animal. Here, this keli was trampled on by the animal, but it didn't break it. As it rolled, it eventually broke. Do we look at the original contact relationship, or we look at when it actually broke? So Bosami Kararin, we look at it when the original contact did the animal directly trampled on the keli, the gufiyu, as part of the animal. We look at when the keli broke. At that time, the animal wasn't touching the keli; it was only the force that the animal put into the keli and forced it to roll. It's only pebbles. So which one is it? So let's resolve it from Rabba. Rabba said, Zorak kli meroisha gag. You threw a vessel down from the top. You were standing on top of a roof. Fascinating Gemara. You threw something down, and before it landed on the ground, came along somebody else, took a cricket bat, and gave a smash, and it broke. Now, if the second guy wouldn't have come over, it would have broken anyway. A few seconds later, when it hits the ground and crashing down the ground. But the fact is, who broke it? The second guy. Who pays? Potter. What? The second guy is Potter. Why? The Amrinan, we say, Mana Tavida Tava. He broke a broken keli because it was inevitable that this keli would have been broken. So in other words, What? We look at the moment it left the person's hand on the roof. Definitely it's going to break. So it's as if it's already broken. The second it left the person's hand. So when the second guy came along with a bat and he hit this vessel, he broke a broken vessel. So what do we see clearly from Rabbah? Bosami Koraz, when you look at how it was from the beginning, it's as if already the whole thing broke. So therefore, same here, Rabbah's question. You want
certain it's going to break with this. That's
certain. If it's questionable, then you have to wait to see what happens. Now, you raise an interesting point, which is what Taisa is going to make a distinction, and the Rosh argues and blah, blah. Talk about it tomorrow. So, says the Gemara, so Rabba has no question. You look at the way it started. The original, what started the whole thing rolling, it's as if it all already happened at that moment. But the Rabba had a question. As a result of that, big machlekes in halacha. Many poskim hold since Rabba was definite that Rabba was a suffix, we follow Rabba. Others say since Rabba was the next generation, and we dismiss Rabba altogether and we follow Rabba. The Balmoy and others. Toshma coming here. Now let's resolve this question. Okay, Rabba doesn't know. Let's go see. He does ain't a muad. If the animal hops around and jumps around, is not a muad. But yes, I'm not a muad. What's going on here? What are they arguing? No, you should have known that this is what happened. Your bird, your chicken runs, jumps around, and it breaks. And you should have been more careful. He does salkadatach. Now, of course, jumping around. That's regular. That's what it normally does. Must be the Bryce is missing a few words. Lavhidus vihitis. What happened was jumping around and didn't break it, but then the whatever was jumping on moved, rolled, and then eventually broke. And that's exactly the argument of two Bryces. One Bryce says you look at the beginning, it gives direct contact with the chicken, therefore you pay a full nezik, and the other and you're moved. And the other one says no. We look at it when it broke. You broke it merely your force, and therefore it's considered chatzi nezik tzreiros. You only pay half a nezik. It's not a mood. Then you go look at the original relationship. You look when it broke. No die from one way or another. Why? We're talking about behitit tzreiros. We're talking about you're right. It's talking about mamish case. It was pebbles there. And the pebbles went flying. That's not a keli he's trampled on, and this very keli broke. No, it was pebbles. The pebbles went flying. And machlekes is whether you pay half a nezik or not. Why? Because we just learned. Sumcha says you pay full nezik, and the Rabban say you pay half a nezik. That's the two brises. That the pluk to the Sumcha the Rabban agree. That's exactly what the argument is. How do we view force? We learned in the brises just before. Tanagoylin that were chewing away at the rope of a pail. The nifsik hachevel, the rope tore. Now the chicken had nothing to do with the pail, with a bucket. It was working on the rope. And then the bucket fell down. You pay nezik shalom. Now, what's the relationship between this chicken and the bucket? It's force. Not the chicken was not touching the bucket. So we see clearly from here that why do you pay? If we don't look at the moment it broke, the moment it broke, you had nothing to do with the bucket. It's while you were cutting away at the rope and the bucket was attached to the rope. We said before it's attached, it's like one thing. So therefore, you make the chicken pay the full amount because we look at it at the beginning of your relationship. Clear. Tagmar says, who said you're paying here for the bucket? All it says, Yechayiv nezik shalom for the rope. He ruined the rope. But for the bucket, we look at it when it actually broke, or when it broke it was only your force, you pay half a nezik. Says if talking about the rope, Mishuni, you think chickens need rope? Chickens don't need rope. And what do we learn before? If you do something which is not normal, it falls on the keren, which you pay also only half a nezik. The Mo's Belisha, no, this rope was full of dough on it. Someone was kneeling on it, so therefore it was pecking away at the dough. That's normal. Says the Gemara, says clearly, and the bucket broke, and it sounds like, what are we focusing on? The bucket. And when we say you got to pay, we're talking about the bucket. But the bucket is only, if you go monotrinator, if you go after the moment that it broke, you should only pay half a nezik. It's right. No, maybe you take the focus not on the beginning, but when it broke, and therefore taka it's only its force. But this follows sumchis. It says that for force you also pay nezik shom because he holds koiche kegufay. He doesn't believe this halach mashilin. Look at the next part. Nitas mimenu. What happens if the pail went flying from it? Yeah, it broke away from it, and shavar it broke. It broke, and then it fell on another keli, this bucket, and it broke that second keli. Is the bucket originally sounds like it was direct mishal nezik shalom. But al which is only force, mishal chatzi nezik. But you just said that we're following sumchis. According to sumchis, even the second keli should pay the full amount because it's only force. And sumchis says that koyach kegufay. But the only thing is, this is a second generation force. The bucket is a first generation force, and then the bucket went fly. The bucket fell off the rope, and it broke and it rolled away, and then it went flying, and it broke something else. So it's a second generation. So the Gemara will say maybe there's a distinction between a second generation and a first generation. The sumchis, if we're saying we follow sumchis and we follow, when it happens, mi isle chati nezik. And the can tell me shiny lesukah by nezik koicha the koich is a different second generation, first generation. We know in Hilchos Shabbos there's a difference with direct or indirect here also. Second generation, maybe sumchis agrees, it's not really considered you're doing it and you only pay half. So that's the question. Rabashi remained with the question. He's not sure. What would a second generation be treated like? It's clear from here that a second generation is a second generation. Even sumchas will agree. You only pay half a nezik. Means not like what his force. It doesn't must be that Rabbanan who hold that for force you pay a full nezik, and they say for the pail you pay the full nezik, and for the flying debris from the pail you pay half a nezik. Now, why for the pail do you pay a full nezik, even though it only broke after it was cut off from the rope and after it rolled a little bit? Must be because you go after the beginning, the original relationship. Doesn't this prove basami karazlin? Shmana basami karazlin. Yes, Abiba said no proof at all. You know why? That the ka'azul minei uminei. Who said we're talking about a second generation force? What happened was the chicken kept on jumping around, and when this keli went flying and broke another one, it was a chicken who was constantly kept on pushing it. So it didn't break by rolling to another. Not a force here at all. He was pushing the pail the whole time, and he broke it while he was touching it. So there's no basam mikar, basam manatfir, but the whole time he was breaking it. We'll stop here and we'll continue tomorrow. We'll talk a bit more about this more just tomorrow. Have a good day, everyone.